What is the most resilient parasite? A bacteria? A virus? An intestinal worm? An idea? Resilient, highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold of the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate. An idea that is fully formed, fully understood, that sticks.
The idea was to be a symbol.
Batman could be anybody. That was the point.
It was damn good to see him back.
Not everybody agrees.
Ideas have always been the real star of every Christopher Nolan film, from their pre-production all the way to the way they live on and are remembered as Blu-rays on a shelf. Ideas are Nolan's premises, trailers, and box office draws all in one, and they take priority over the entire frame, over the actors, the production design, and even and especially the story. Like any filmmaker, we come to Nolan's movies to be entertained, yes, but to specifically Nolan so we can be wowed and gobsmacked by something we'd never even conceived before, let alone seen. Nolan does his best to deliver on these expectations, whether it's a semi flipping a complete 180 degrees, or a dream within a dream, or even a new galaxy, and for the most part, he succeeds. As a filmmaker, he's gained unbelievable praise from critics and audiences, and a string of box office juggernauts has given him several blank checks to make any movie he wants. He's even been compared to the most beloved directors of all time, and obviously pulls inspiration from so many of them. Watching a Christopher Nolan movie for the first time never fails to feel like a true mind-blowing odyssey. So why are so many of them made of such incomplete thoughts?
He could look like a man who takes himself too seriously.
These movies are designed as puzzle boxes that will tease and confuse us to the point that when the credits roll, we all spend the next hour and a half asking questions and disentangling timelines before ultimately making plans for when we're all going to go and see them again.
Him again.
But they're also almost desperately reaching for an all-time genre classic status that they can never quite grasp. Instead, Christopher Nolan movies have carved out their own subgenre of filmmaking that leaves them adjacent and alien to the work they're emulating and trying to join. So what actually makes his movies distinct? And what bars them from the ranks of Ridley Scott or Alfred Hitchcock or Stanley Kubrick or Steven Spielberg or any other proven auteur? Well, after another journey through all of his major films, I've arrived not only at an answer, but what is to me a glass-shattering explanation as to why that question even needs to be asked, and the reason for today's video.
And here we go.
Christopher Nolan has absolutely no perspective on his own ideas.
It's not true. That's impossible!
So today I wanted to go through all his feature-length movies one by one, explore the ideas on display, and look at how Nolan fails to follow through on them. And hopefully I won't drive myself into a post-production coma.
What the hell are you?
From Memento to Tenet, Nolan's films have changed a lot. Yet through the elements on the screen, we can always tell when we're watching one, as easily as we can tell when we're watching a Quentin Tarantino or Coen Brothers or David Fincher film. They have an uncomplicated color palette. They have big, booming or operatic scores, often by Hans Zimmer. Their tone is always dead serious with the highest stakes possible. Story climaxes involve a lot of cross-cutting, often between three simultaneously occurring events. The resolutions are either bittersweet, ambiguous, or both. They're shot and edited with the intent to make audiences feel like they're on the ground with the characters in the heat of the moment.
Now just take it and go.
I said jewelry.
His movies don't have traditional good guys and bad guys. Morality is entirely subjective, as even their most clear-cut protagonists do some highly questionable things. Plots are always about an unreliable or untrustworthy man working to achieve some sort of clearly defined goal laid out early in the movie, and that character almost always has a dead wife.
Is my problem with women any movie directed by Christopher Nolan? Because yes, women are involved, but it's never really about the women. It's about me.
Seriously, Chris, what is up with that? The structure of the editing and the puzzle box trickling reveal of information make them stick with us for hours after they end and necessitate the conversations that turn The Dark Knight and Inception into cultural touchstones of their time. But when all is said and done and the timelines are put in order, what we have isn't much more than a shallow yet self-important piece of popcorn entertainment.
Are you not entertained?
Not that there's anything morally or even qualitatively wrong with that being a director's wheelhouse. I'm just saying we didn't see the other shallow popcorn entertainment this year stubbornly insisting on its original release parameters, knowing they were threats to general health and safety.
Stay calm. You've been poisoned.
Anyway.
Tom lost part of his brain in a hunting accident. His memory only lasts 10 seconds.
Memento is a neo-noir from 2000 starring Guy Pearce, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Joe Pantoliano that turns the mystery detective genre on its head. The story follows a man named Leonard with short-term memory loss as he and his friend Teddy hunt down the man who he believes murdered his wife. The conceit of the movie is that while this is a rather standard plot for a film noir, it is told through two separate timelines moving in opposite directions, providing much-needed context for the slaying in the film's opening scene. One timeline observes Leonard's hunt for John G. moving backwards, and one takes place beforehand that has Leonard on the phone with a mystery caller explaining the background of his condition moving forwards. The movie opens with Leonard killing Teddy and then moves backward from that decision. The entire time, we are led to believe that Teddy is the man Leonard has been hunting for all along, and is enough of an evil bastard to pretend to be his friend. But every scene in the detective timeline is a direct reversal on the context of the scene preceding it. Every situation we find Leonard in is jarringly different from the circumstances we are led to expect. The phone call timeline gradually clarifies information, while the detective one obscures it, until the two timelines catch up in the movie's all-important twist.
Come on, you got your revenge. Enjoy it while you still remember. What difference does it make whether he was your guy or not?
We find out that Leonard has manipulated his memory loss condition to trick himself into murdering Teddy after he learned that Teddy was manipulating him to hunt down criminals who fit Leonard's profile like a vigilante. More than that, Leonard's wife actually survived her assault, but her death was an assisted suicide enabled by his condition. But more importantly for Leonard, the system of absolute certainties and memories on which he staked his sanity and sense of self is a fantasy he chose to embrace over the more difficult and frank reality, no more honest to himself than he condemns Teddy and Natalie for being. Now, Memento is a pretty small film. There are no flashy visual effects, and the camera work is pragmatic and straightforward, shot on a budget of only $9 million. So what's the idea? A murder mystery where the detective can't remember any details from his investigation, so he has to get creative to keep himself on track.
My car.
This is your car.
Oh, you're in a playful mood.
Every noticeable or important detail about every character that we take for granted is another puzzle box with its own origin. Immediately the premise provides conflict and tension and a lot to unpack ingrained in the minutiae of such a character. So right off the bat, it presents themes of doubt and vengeance and paranoia and suspicion, while its twist ending plays with the notion of our definition of self and how we lie to ourselves to be happy.
So you lie to yourself to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that. We all do it.
It's a clever reversal that never fails to catch first-time watchers off guard. But once we look past the shock and awe at the strategic withholding of information, the film leaves it up to the viewer to decide on its perspective, ending before it even has the time to offer one. Was Leonard justified in executing Teddy? Was Teddy as much a victim as the people he put in Leonard's path? What happens to Leonard with his crusade ended? Is ignorance bliss? Do I lie to myself like Leonard, or just to others like Teddy? What does it change if I do? Who has an answer to any of these questions? Not Nolan. Insomnia is Nolan's second film and the exception that proves the rule.
Did you love her? Randy, did you love her?
Sure, she was nice.
To date, the crime thriller starring Al Pacino and Robin Williams is easily Nolan's most grounded and probably most complete story with a clear perspective and a beginning, middle, and end. And it's probably not a coincidence that it's Nolan's least remembered or celebrated film.
What a shame.
Al Pacino plays a veteran cop from Los Angeles running a murder investigation in a small Alaska town immersed in constant daylight. Early in the film, in a chaotic altercation with the murderer, Pacino's character kills his partner who was just about to testify against him in an internal affairs investigation. His testimony had the potential to overturn their entire career of lawful arrests and convictions. Plagued by guilt, paranoia, and chronic insomnia, he loses his grip on reality and spends the rest of the movie hiding his culpability from the voracious rookie played by Hilary Swank, while also denying his similarities to the killer blackmailing him for help. It's the only film on which Nolan does not have a screenplay credit, and it's evident all over the frame. The film is a remake of a Norwegian film with a screenplay translated and adapted by Hilary Seitz. Similar to Memento, Insomnia is a neo-noir thriller orbiting around themes of self-doubt and paranoia and duality and corruption and internal darkness. But Insomnia is much more candid, and the ending takes a definitive stance on the plights of its central characters. As Pacino's character bleeds out, he urges Hilary Swank to file her report honestly about the partner he killed, preserving her moral integrity and saving her from following down his path.
Why? Don't lose your way.
The ending of Insomnia gives us everything, and unlike Nolan's later work, lets the character arc take center stage over the execution of next-level elaborate constructs. It leaves us asking no questions beyond the usual ones, clarifying the sequence of discovering key information, and allows us to reflect on the filmmaking, the characters, the narrative, and the performances. The film was a critical and financial success, grossing over $100 million and earning praise for its re-examining of the source material. And yet, it has retained almost no cultural footprint and is always the last mentioned in discussions on Christopher Nolan's filmography, or Pacino's, Williams, or Swank's. It's just not a conversation piece like Memento is, and it quickly faded away. But Insomnia and Memento's noir detective roots got Nolan enough success and attention to land him an offer to make
The Batman.
Batman Begins is the best of the Nolan Batman trilogy for several reasons, but it's also the one that wears its theme on its sleeve. It doesn't take a film theory scholar to pinpoint what the idea at the heart of Batman Begins is.
That's the power of fear.
To conquer fear, you must become fear. Breathe in your fears.
Don't be afraid.
That's frightened me.
Then watch Gotham tear itself apart through fear.
It's the classic Batman origin, but analyzed through a specific lens of the power fear holds over individuals and drives their actions and decisions, and the courage our heroes exhibit in its face.
All creatures feel fear.
Even the scary ones.
Especially the scary ones.
The film opens with childhood Bruce being attacked by bats. The fear he develops from that attack is what drives his parents out into Crime Alley. Bruce tells Falcone that he's not afraid of him, but Falcone boasts that he holds the power of fear over Gotham's entire justice system. When he heads to Tibet, Bruce tells Ra's al Ghul that he seeks the ability to manipulate the fears in criminals, and Ra's tells him he can't without mastering his own. Bruce chooses bats for his symbol to make his enemies share his dread, and Scarecrow's entire MO is rooted in his fear toxin, which becomes Raz's device for Gotham's destruction.
Dr. Crane isn't here right now. But if you'd like to make an appointment...
Bats evolve from being the symbol of Bruce's weakness to the fear he has overcome and turned against his enemies. By the time he returns to Wayne Manor, he is beyond his fear completely, and Batman can officially begin.
I'm Batman.
The movie does a really good job of consistently reminding us of this idea and connecting the story's end to its beginning. At the climax of the film, the fear toxin overruns the Narrows and the people begin tearing each other apart. It's the logical extreme of the desire he expressed to Ra's. But aside from some tense and claustrophobic scenes with our characters in danger, the idea never goes anywhere. It's less about a theme tying the movie together and more a glorified backdrop for the conflict to take place.
And if that pressure reaches us, the water supply right across the whole city is gonna blow!
Batman's victory over Ra's on the train honors their comic book origins by calling back to their clashing ideologies over Batman's rule against killing. But the toxin is counteracted by an easily acquired antidote, and Gotham is allowed to return to normal. It leaves the idea of an economically devastated city tearing itself apart through chemically weaponized fear practically dangling, and the resolution disproves nothing about Raz's binary beliefs about justice. This time, any connection or through line of ideas between characters is not just left for us to decide, it actively has none. By the end of the film, fear has regressed from the core of both Bruce and Gotham's characters almost to an afterthought. Instead, it's superseded by Rachel's evolving philosophy on the masks we wear and who we are underneath. It's
not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you.
It's explained that the League's attack overruns the Narrows beyond reclamation, but the fear toxin dynamic has no lasting impact on the characters or on the city. Sure, Batman Begins is a really good Batman story, but any themes and ideas it does have are only peppered in more to build a consistent tone for Batman and an atmosphere of a city so broken its foundation is on the verge of rotting out from under it than they are to actually be explored or commented on in any meaningful way.
I'll look into it. Magic. Magic.
With Batman Begins marking his third success in a row, Nolan's career took off and he dove headfirst into the mind-bending thrillers we now associate him with.
The first part is called The Pledge.
Even though The Prestige was filmed on a budget a quarter of the size of Batman Begins, it was his most daring film to date, with a mission statement he puts in the film's iconic opening line.
Now, you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. Because, of course, you're not really looking. You want to be fooled.
That's right. This movie is going to confuse the hell out of you, and you're going to love it for doing that. Pretty ballsy move for any filmmaker to just proclaim that at the outset.
The great Danton!
The Prestige's ending is an all-time head-scratcher, and audiences ate it up. It was Nolan's complete abandonment of ever making a film like Insomnia again, opting instead for an abrupt final sequence presented in such a way that we quickly found out we were watching a very different kind of movie than we believed.
Are you watching closely?
Why no, I f***ing wasn't, Christian Bale. But of course, it worked. Like Memento, the film was an instant conversation starter, and it rewarded discussion as much as rewatches. The narrative is immediately engaging, and the editing constantly keeps us on our toes as we get more and more sucked in by the gripping performances.
The second act is called The Turn.
This time the ideas came bursting out of the script. What if two magicians had a rivalry that turned into obsession? What if he could structure a movie like a magic trick? What if the race for the ultimate illusion drove them both to personal and psychological ruin? What if that illusion was so terrifying that it redefined life as we knew it? Couple all of that with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale's competing charismas and some incredibly disjointed yet coherent editing, and you have a blockbuster on your hands.
That's why every magic trick has a third act. The part we call The Prestige.
But what did it all mean? We have these themes of magic and science and duality and rivalry and obsession and revenge and identity and even the entertainment industry as a whole. It's...
But if you could fool them, even for a second, then you can make them wonder.
It's the perfect backdrop and setup and character dynamic to rocket you to commercial success.
Man's reach exceeds his imagination.
But by the time the film ends, all we have are questions, and by the time we've seen it enough to understand the answers, it's just a pretty good story.
That's not a trick. But he has to come back. There has to be a
prestige.
Exactly.
It doesn't offer any perspective or opinion on the nature of obsession or commitment to craft or entertainment at all. The closest the film comes to taking a stance on anything is positioning Angier as straight up evil and Borden as nobler, if not entirely good.
Shut up! I don't want to hear it anymore!
The characters have their own view on what's morally justifiable, but the dual perspective between such cold and monstrous figures like Borden and Angier leaves us utterly detached and apathetic to them both. The only characters possessing any morals whatsoever are consistently disregarded. It's neither their actions that stick with us, nor their perspectives the film invites us to focus on. Now, this is not to say that a film necessarily has to do any of that to have any value. This is, after all, a very entertaining 2-hour romp. It's a fun place to spend a couple hours immersed in, but the film editing overcomplicates itself to add the illusion of weight to a cut-and-dry narrative. Once the timelines are disentangled from the Russian doll-style mystery, The Prestige isn't really about anything, and by the film's own admission, we shouldn't even want to figure it out, because that's letting ourselves be less entertained. We want to be
fooled.
No, darkness!
Here we go. I could do an entire additional video about my feelings and opinions on The Dark Knight. In fact, maybe not a bad idea. Anyway, I have my issues with it, but we're going to table them for now. Up to this point, The Dark Knight was Nolan's biggest and most ambitious project by far. Having fully proven himself as a filmmaker able to sell tickets on his name alone, whatever restraints that remained came off and Nolan was free to make this movie however and with whatever he wanted. But as the budget and scope of his project balloons, the ideas that prop them up all become smaller and less opaque.
It's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble.
The Dark Knight is a gritty crime thriller that follows up with the characters and world of Batman Begins that then explores the delicate and volatile relationship between Batman, the Joker, and the people of Gotham. The Joker steals things and kills people, Batman tries to figure him out before he can do it again, the Gotham citizens are terrified of being caught in the crossfire, rinse and repeat.
No more dead cops! Yeah!
But at the Joker's core is this notion that when the stakes are at their highest, even the noblest and most morally upstanding individuals will start to turn on each other out of a primal instinct to survive.
I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
That the only way to live in this world is without rules, and the only way to bring people around to understanding that is by terror and force.
Introduce a little anarchy, and everything becomes chaos.
This is a two-dimensional idea with a declarative yes or no option and no room for nuance. And as a result, we only get to consider and explore it in the final 45 minutes or so, even though it shifts the identity of the movie dramatically.
Do I really look like a guy with a plan?
We get several elaborate plans designed to force Batman or Gotham into making difficult, life-ending choices out of desperation or survival, and each with different results. But at long last, we get a glimpse of perspective. The Joker orchestrates the boat oil drum experiment in the most black and white terms imaginable to force the people's hand. 2 boats, 2 bombs, 2 detonators, a ticking clock, and a choice. The scene shifts between the 2 boats as nerve-shredding tension cuts through every person like butter, each terrified that they're about to die. They try to pass off the burden of guilt on authority or democracy or ethical responsibility, but there's no getting around it. They have to actively choose whether or not to kill others to save their own lives. In twin moments of strength and weakness, one civilian volunteers to trigger the detonator, while a prison guard relinquishes it to someone he believes will. It's over. The Joker's won. People are impulsive and selfish cutthroats. All he has to do is turn the key and... he can't do it. It's too much. Neither boat takes the easy way out, and they prove the Joker wrong. Batman finally catches him, and everything ends happily.
Yay!
I maintain the belief that the Joker was lying, and if either boat did actually turn their key, it would only detonate that boat, and will do so until the day I die. Until the Joker tells Batman that no, it was never about this. It's about Harvey, and when Gotham sees what's become of their altruistic DA, they'll be right back where they started, and he'll win.
But the Joker cannot win.
I have a ton of complaints with this movie, and these last 45 minutes in particular, but this is where they all come to a head. The film actively avoids taking a position that is too optimistic or pessimistic, and ends up with neither. Batman takes the fall for Harvey's murders, and the image of Harvey Dent remains intact so his convicts can stay behind bars. It works great as a bookend on Harvey's character arc, but punts the thought away that Batman could ever have to grapple with the idea that the Joker may have been right, and what kind of city it means he's defending.
This town deserves a better class of criminal.
At the same time as the boats, Batman is forced to equally desperate measures as he turns Lucius's sonar concept into a citywide surveillance web. Lucius objects in Orwellian horror and even resigns his position.
As long as this machine is at Wayne Enterprises, I won't be.
It's asserted as a massive ethical concern about the very idea of Batman being too powerful to keep anyone truly safe. But before anyone can have a meaningful conversation about it, before the negative effects of surveillance are allowed to unfold, and before Nolan can even imply a dilemma, the computer self-destructs and the question along with it. Lucius gets to have his faith in Bruce rewarded, but the movie narrowly dodges the question of answering if the ends truly justify the means. Sure, the framing is good defeats evil at a cost, and that's a great note on which to leave things that fits the spirit of Batman. But for a story all about dueling ideologies and backing individuals into impossible corners, topped off with almost a full hour dedicated to the idea of seeing what people will do, on which it comes so agonizingly close to provoking actual thought, The Dark Knight goes out of its way to preserve this detached neutrality so that after everything preceding it and every idea raised, in its conclusion, the characters and world and even the audience are affected by nothing but specific and dramatic material choices and events.
Mr.
Oh good, you're still here. Filmed on a budget of only $20 million smaller than The Dark Knight, Inception was Nolan's biggest carte blanche that wasn't tied to an existing IP. It kicked off the modern era of Christopher Nolan films we've come to expect from him, primarily consisting of mind-bending science fiction thrillers about playing with time. Of course, it was a massive critical and commercial success, and solidified the foundation for widespread toxic Nolan bro fan culture. Despite the scale and layered deceptions and misdirection on all levels of dreams and reality, this is the most straightforward Nolan film by far. The idea is simple, but its scale is massive, and the premise is a trailer in and of itself. No one showed up to this because they cared about the story or the characters. We wanted to see how a heist on dreams within dreams would be visually realized. We wanted to understand the rules of the story world, and we wanted to see the plan come together. And in a departure from his previous films, Inception isn't a mystery or a puzzle at all. It's a heist. The characters spell out exactly what will happen before it even begins. By the midpoint of the movie, we understand the stakes completely, and every success, failure, or choice carries a specific dramatic weight. Through the 3 separate timelines, Nolan's storytelling does an impeccable job of keeping the synchronous chain of events crystal clear in our minds.
In a dream, your mind functions more quickly, therefore, time seems to feel more slow.
5 minutes in the real world gives you an hour in the dream.
The only variables that obstruct Leonardo DiCaprio and his team from achieving their goal are the army of psychic projections and Maul. But Maul is primarily a story device employed as a personal demon for DiCaprio to grow beyond. She exists adjacent to the established parameters of the heist and only to generate narrative tension.
Oh no! Jesus!
Now, there's an entire theory of reading Inception as Nolan winking to the camera on how he perceives the filmmaking process. I don't put much stock into that, but there is a part of it that's relevant to our purposes here. Tom Hardy's character Eames provides the key piece to DiCaprio's puzzle on how he can make Inception possible.
No, it's not just about depth. You need the simplest version of the idea in order for it to grow naturally in your subject's mind. It's a very subtle art.
Now, if we do buy into this theory, maybe this is Nolan acknowledging that blowing an audience away isn't just about the highest degree of spectacle, but that it doesn't work if audiences can't firmly grasp the structure of it. Which may explain why such a significant portion of the movie is spent explaining and reiterating the rules of time distortion between layers.
Sedation is easy. Decades. It could be infinite. I don't know. Ask him. He's the one who's been there.
A decade removed from Memento, the questions at the heart of Nolan's films have moved beyond deep philosophical introspections he asks the audience into being nth-level what-ifs he's operating as though the audience is asking him. Once again, for Inception, the idea isn't the story, it's the backdrop on which he sets up an above-average action thriller. All the performers hit their mark, and the storytelling makes it easy for us to get swept up in the tension regarding the team's success and failure, but beyond its unique concept and film editing, it has no more meaning than the summer of 2010's other big blockbuster success. Maybe it even has less.
Darkness, 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 dark.
After the twin phenomenons and Oscar wins for The Dark Knight and Inception, Nolan's budgets and ambitions exploded. It was always going to be impossible to recreate the passion and hype that launched The Dark Knight, but Rises dove headfirst into the kind of overstuffed, overcomplicated, and outright silly storytelling that would have sunk Inception.
Do you feel in charge?
It would be the beginning of an experimental phase where Nolan expanded his craft and tried to tell deeper and more meaningful stories. The Dark Knight Rises is where Nolan's issues with objectivity over thought-provoking topics really began to manifest. This movie has so much going on, and so little of it ends up mattering.
So easy. So simple.
It's got themes and echoes of Charles Dickens, characters clashing over economic inequality, Bane starts Occupy Wall Street, the criminal justice system becomes a little less corrupt, police are trapped underground but kept alive because Bane and his army of former orphans want to give the people of Gotham power and hope, but none of it matters because he's going to blow them all up anyway, and also it wasn't Bane's plan at all because it's a revenge scheme by Talia al Ghul, who just took the controlling share in Wayne Enterprises, to gain Bruce's trust with her green energy project that is now a nuclear bomb, all while Batman has to get over his ego that physically and emotionally alienated him from every other character, travel across the world and back to fistfight the guy who just broke his back before he ultimately decides to fake his death and runs away with Catwoman, who used to work for Bane but betrayed him when she couldn't get her clean slate. Oh yeah, and there's this guy. What? Okay, this movie has a lot and nothing on its mind at the same time. This time, there is no singular open-ended idea to be explored that drives its characters or story or even tying them to each other. It's a dozen smaller ideas in a trench coat randomly raised and dropped that each could have easily been their own individual movie. They keep its narrative from sagging with a string of familiar buzzwords and images to invoke our prejudices and pre-existing knowledge about them to give the illusion of depth. We unknowingly tie our values to the character's morality and want to believe Batman and Gordon and Catwoman and possibly Bane are fighting for what we believe is right and against what we believe is wrong. The reality is that the story explores these dense topics so little and with such deniability that anyone can come away from it thinking that its position on them is exactly what they want it to be.
We take Gotham from the corrupt, the rich, the oppressors of generations who have kept you down with myths of opportunity, and we give it back to you.
The Dark Knight Rises script has a lot of problems. It's overcomplicated, unintentionally hilarious, flat out bad at times, and it relies on a twist coming out of nowhere to declaw the only slightly compelling thing about it. To be honest, I don't know that tying any of these ideas together with a central viewpoint would have made the movie any better, but the way they're used and dropped is both forgettable and uncompelling. This movie is filled to the brim with ideas, but Nolan wants nothing to do with any of them beyond calling on us to recall our own real-world parallels while he emphatically says nothing about them. Basic morality is barely even defined between our heroes and villains in a Batman movie.
Where's the fun in that?
We aren't here to explore or connect these notions at all, just to raise them. To this movie, and maybe even to Nolan himself, wealth inequality and poverty and clean energy and corporate corruption aren't real questions with difficult answers. They're more tools in his belt he can use to tell fun, grown-up comic book stories.
I've Gotham's reckoning.
Wanna go home, Earth, don't like space, it's too big, wanna go home, wanna go to Earth.
Interstellar signaled a major shift in Nolan's filmmaking and his aspirations. Maybe he just really wants that Oscar he missed with Dark Knight and Inception, or maybe 8 years of being hailed on Twitter and Reddit as the greatest filmmaker in history got to him and he actually believes it. Or maybe it was neither. But Interstellar moves and operates like it has something to prove.
Record the facts, analyze, get to the how and the why, then present your conclusions.
Now that he's moved on from enormous franchises, the movies he's made post-Batman with nearly unlimited budgets have revealed a lot about the kinds of stories that interest him and the ones he thinks he's skilled enough to tell. Interstellar was a script by Christopher Nolan's brother that was going to be directed by Steven Spielberg, and right off the bat, it's clear that's where his aim is set. It's a massively ambitious space odyssey tearing its two protagonists apart by decades and billions of miles while still being connected by their love of both each other and of science. It's another really simple idea, but it's stretched to almost 3 hours long and distorted almost to the point that it loses itself completely in the effort to prove how smart and profound it is.
My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable.
I wouldn't presume to know what goes on in Nolan's head when making something like this, but the way the film comes off is like an attempt to trout Spielberg's innate gift for pathos and Stanley Kubrick's next-level conceptual energy in one fell swoop.
Swooping is bad.
But it's here that his problem with perspective visibly clashes with his problems as a storyteller. The entire setup for the movie is that Earth has been given a ticking clock, meaning humanity must seek out a new homeworld if the species is to survive, which sends Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway, and others barreling through a wormhole to the other end of space to find a new planet in time to save his daughter.
How can I put it?
Earth becoming unlivable is a terrifyingly real thing that is going to happen. And when it happens, it will be because of man-made climate change. These are facts, I looked it up, climate deniers need not apply. So finding another planet to live on could be a necessity. So Interstellar is not just a sci-fi epic or a cute story about paternal relationships. It could easily have been an explication on the unsustainability of human nature, and even another timelessly prophetic sci-fi film akin to 2001, Blade Runner, or Minority Report as an honest and pointed look at our possible future. And much of the time, it feels like that's what it's striving for through its slavish commitment to honest scientific realism at the expense of character depth or even narrative cohesion. But the closest we get to understanding the nature of the apocalypse happening on Earth is that a dust bowl and blight has left the human race running out of food. The exact origin and nature are unknown, but the impending doom is distinctly certain.
We're not meant to save the world. We're meant to leave it.
All signs point to the disaster being climate-related, but for legal purposes, no one in the movie says it. Implying a climate-related apocalypse would be taking a definitive stand on humanity's inherent destructive and self-destructive nature. It immediately begs the question of what the point is in finding a new world when there's nothing to guarantee we won't destroy that one too. And rather than ask that question, or worse, answer it, Nolan punts it away. All of that is taken for granted and glossed over in the film's first 40 minutes because the space travel and father-daughter dynamic are more important. No, the closest Interstellar gets to a tangible objection to anything is the notion of history books being altered to discourage people's thirst for exploration and discovery.
And if we don't want a repeat of the excess and wastefulness of the 20th century, then we need to teach our kids about this planet, not tales of leaving it.
That and that surprise Matt Damon's villain character is named Man, but there's no clear cinematic language as to what aspect of humanity is being condemned here or if it's just painting in broad strokes.
Man's reach exceeds his imagination.
Instead, Interstellar poses as a giant what-if being asked to Nolan and spins out from there. The story begins on what if humanity was forced to head to the stars to worlds unknown. What could that expedition really look like? What are the stakes? How could it unfold? And what complications could arise? Then by the ending, the questions shift to the audience, like how time's relative nature feels across galaxies, what's the furthest extent the expedition could go, are we already too deeply rooted in familiarity to save ourselves, and how far across time and space can human connection extend?
My connection with Murph, it is quantifiable.
None of that is necessarily a bad idea on paper, but Interstellar carries itself through 3 hours with the gravity of practically being the most important movie we've ever seen, purely by the virtue of just asking the questions about human beings Nolan is either too uninterested or ill-equipped to answer.
I'm counting every minute, same as you, Cooper.
What are you doing?
Waiting to be rescued.
I don't have that much to say about Dunkirk. It cuts through the science fiction and character motivations entirely to center on the time-sensitive three-way cross-cut scenes that were the central conceit of every movie since Dark Knight and stretch them out to feature length. It's Nolan's simplest premise yet, but he executes it as complicated as possible. 400,000 Allied soldiers are surrounded on the beach at Dunkirk, civilian boats are crossing the channel to rescue them, but they have to survive long enough for them to get there. Nolan tells the story on 3 different fronts of the battlefield over 3 different time spans that gradually intersect closer to the movie's climax. Dialogue is sparingly employed, characters are almost uniformly unmemorable by design, and even the Germans they're fighting don't appear on the screen. As an exercise in tension, the movie absolutely works. But as an expansion or even an examination of time and its effects on individuals and events, my response to it is an unequivocal big fat and? I don't mean to disparage Nolan's ambition or intent here, but the movie's key gambit fails to impress. To me, it conveys a lack of faith in his own ability as a storyteller, insofar that he could not represent the events chronologically and keep his audience's attention. The various switches between perspectives allow time to pass wherever the camera isn't, and it avoids being monotonous by interrupting the relative stability with dogfights and life-or-death encounters. But what does Nolan's editing structure tell me about time that a clock doesn't? Is he trying to say anything at all, or is it all about the fact that he can do it this way, therefore he does? I understand that the intent was to show the breadth and scale of the Dunkirk evacuation by demonstrating how the 3 theaters of the battlefield and the elapsing time between them amounted to one of the proudest moments in British naval history. But for a movie about such a moment, and I'm willing to bet a deep source of patriotism for Nolan, the soldiers and civilians of the evacuation take a backseat in service to nothing but his capital C cinema filmmaking. Dunkirk is coherent, it's beautiful, it's gripping, and it's even documentary. But I think that's all it is.
Time. The answer is time.
I confess, at time of recording, I haven't seen Tenet yet for a few reasons, and that's clearly not going to change anytime soon. That being said, one snippet of dialogue has made its way into nearly every review I've seen that, if I'm right, despite Nolan's return to making mind-bending action thrillers, would mean that absolutely nothing has changed. From what I gather from the available materials, Tenet is about time inversion rather than travel. What I expect that means is more high-level concepts and storytelling that we've never seen before, explored throughout another nearly 3-hour action thriller.
I don't know what just happened, but I like it!
Whether or not this film is a canonical sequel to Inception, this idea of don't understand it, feel it, sounds like another disappointing punt that saves Nolan from having to make his unique style of filmmaking actually about anything. Instead of inviting us to study and analyze his world of time inversion, as with The Prestige, he seems to actually be discouraging us from engaging with it on more than a superficial level. It's not an ominous "are you watching closely?"
Are you watching closely?
It's a timid "don't look too closely." This is all speculation, of course, because I still haven't seen Tenet and probably won't for several months. But if I'm right, then all I can say is this movie is embracing its place as another Michael Bay movie for thinking people, as well as a box office catastrophe. What's strange about this particular era for Christopher Nolan movies, though, is how each is now almost an overcorrection of the previous one. For years, his movies were accused of having badly written parts for women and robotic exposition machines for characters with no lasting pathos, then BAM! Interstellar has an entire father-daughter motive running through it. But that movie is both lambasted for an over-reliance on hand-holding dialogue to tell the story and a way too confusing plot, and mocked for overacted scenes of characters shouting names at each other, so he makes Dunkirk, a historical epic that is practically bankrupt of dialogue, has almost no character names in it at all, and a much more streamlined plot. But while that's probably his best received and most respected film since The Dark Knight, he follows it up with Tenet, which shares almost no similarities to Dunkirk, and falls back on the science fiction action filmmaking that made Inception so widely beloved.
I don't get it.
Every time one of these movies comes out, there's a mad dash to decipher Nolan's intent and theming, and how the new movie fits in with the rest of his body of work. What is Nolan saying here about identity? What's he saying about time, or trauma, or guilt? What's he saying about dead wives? Oh, no! To be honest, I think he just wants to make good movies. Any connections between them beyond being actual sequels to each other are just how his mind works, and he'll never publicly admit to anything else. Hell, I think he wants to make great movies, but doesn't have the vision or skill to get there.
All I wanted to do was prove that I was a better magician.
If I look at the greatest filmmakers of the past and present, all of whom have at least some influence on Nolan's films, whether he knows it or not, they all reach that status because their best films, among other things, aren't afraid to tell us how to feel or what to think. Dr. Strangelove is a blistering satire on the hilarious stupidity of nuclear war. Jurassic Park is a warning on the dangers of unchecked ambition and commercialization, and Alien is an indictment of capitalism that doubles as an unintentional feminist affirmation. Rear Window is about the sickly enticing perversion of watching a Hitchcock movie, and so on. I don't doubt that these are the heights that Christopher Nolan aspires to, and maybe he even believes he's hit them. But how can he when his movies have absolutely no viewpoint to the degree that we aren't even supposed to know how we feel about his protagonists?
Well, a guy dresses up like a bat clearly has issues.
To me, Nolan is just an ideas man. He's a J.J. Abrams who's certain he's a Stanley Kubrick. Time and again he can pull us into his head for 2 hours and leave us feeling utterly exhilarated. He's a genius at imagining unique concepts and pulling that idea out of his head and realizing it on screen and even twisting those ideas into trackable themes. But every time he leaves it to us to decide both what he's saying and what to do with it. There's nothing wrong with only being an ideas man. Just ask this guy. And it doesn't make his movies bad or stop them from being really entertaining. But for someone who has almost certainly bought into his self-preceding reputation as one of the few premier auteurs of the 21st century, I can't help but wish his movies would go a little deeper. Thank you so much to everyone who watched this video. Thank you especially if you made it to the end. I know 40 minutes is a lot, so I hope you enjoyed at least some part of it. If you like it, make sure you do all the YouTube things of like, share, comment, subscribe. I'll put a link in the description so you can follow me on Twitter. Tell me what you'd like to hear me talk about next. I'm always looking for new ideas. I have a bunch of planned videos in the works, but let me know what you guys want. I'm looking forward to doing some more of these, and I'm already working on the next one. Promise it won't be as long as this one. That is not going to happen again. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you real soon.